For 4 minutes, Mr Kerr.
Well, Presiding Officer, it is a great privilege to be able to speak in this debate. And let me start off by saying how much I genuinely respect Richard Leonard. I have never had any doubt in the 40 years I have known Richard Leonard that he holds his convictions genuinely and sincerely. However, as he well knows, we fundamentally disagree. We were both students at the University of Stirling during the miners' strike. And I have a vivid memory of a miners' strike support meeting being held in the foyer of the McRobert, when I had the temerity to ask representatives of the NUM why it was that they had not been prepared to allow the miners the opportunity of a secret ballot on strike action. The left, on that occasion, didn't like the question, and I presume probably still doesn't like that question. Because at the end of the day, regardless of what has been said by all of the speakers in this debate so far, I want to make it clear what my position is. Arthur Scargill's primary motivation in the miners' strike was political. It was a politically motivated strike led by Arthur Scargill with one objective in mind, and that was to remove a democratically elected Conservative government led by Margaret Thatcher. Now, the NUM thought they could bring down the Thatcher government, and they were fully justified in some of the assumptions they made, because they'd done the same thing to Ted Heath's Conservative government in 1974. But Margaret Thatcher was no Ted Heath. Yes, the miners' strike pulled communities, families and indeed our country apart. But the trade union bosses weren't doing anything new when they were flexing their industrial muscle and crippling the country, because they'd been doing it for the previous 2 decades. And I will indeed.
Christine Graham.
I disagree with much of the points you make, as you would expect. But do you have any qualms whatsoever? Does the member have any qualms whatsoever about the manner of policing during that period? Would you perhaps address that?
Stephen Kerr.
I have a ton of qualms, if that's how you measure qualms, about how everything was conducted during that period and the nature of the violence on the picket lines and on the secondary picket lines. And I'll come back to that, if I might, in a moment. I want to make the point that the NUM's calculations were justified because of the weakness of previous governments. And because of that, we had seen wage growth spiral out of control, productivity decrease, costs increase, and an economic crisis at that time caused by inflation and an uncompetitive economy. We were regarded as the international economic basket case of basket cases, the sick man of Europe. And let's not forget that Harold Wilson's Labour governments closed 253 pits in comparison to Margaret Thatcher's government, during which time 115 pits were closed. But it was the NUM's refusal to ballot its members to go on strike that seems to have been lost in any of the narrative that we've heard tonight. At no point during the strike were workers ever allowed to have their say through a secret ballot. And it was a time, to address Christine Graham's point, it was a time of fear and intimidation. Bloody violence on the secondary picket line. We've already heard about Orgreave, and no doubt that will come up again. And no doubt about it, at the time, it was a real struggle for the families in those mining communities. But I would say largely thanks, if I may use that word ironically, to Arthur Scargill's egotistical attempt to bring down a democratically elected government under the guise of saving an industry. And that industry, in common with all traditional industries, were already dying due to technological change. But more important than that, a growing sense of aspiration within mining communities and within mining families meant it was no longer the desire of those families that their children should be sent down the pit. I represented Fallen when I was the Member of Parliament for Stirling. Paul May's colliery was famous for being the first out and the last back during the strike. But when I think of the people of Fallen or the former coalfields around Falkirk, I don't think of victims with nothing left to live for. I think of educated, clever, aspirational people who wanted more for their children than going underground to mine coal. Presiding Officer, I think we should memorialise the miners' strike, but for very different reasons from Richard Leonard. For centuries, working-class people have been kept in their places, told they were low-paid, menial, dangerous jobs somehow gave them status, that there was a pride in being part of a community which in doing something no one else wanted to do.
You need to conclude.
Now we know better that this was nothing more than an attempt by vested interests to keep people in their places. Technology, investment, aspiration should improve the lives of everyone. No one should feel shackled to a dying industry for the sake of the ego of a union leader.
I need you to conclude.
And that is what we should also remember.